Hey, today I wanted to do a video on visible mending and Sashiko embroidery. I had a friend that reached out to me about mending some of her jeans. They were a pair that she really liked, but there was a few holes in them. So she kind of let me have creative freedom over them and said that she just wanted some mending done and some embroidery. And I had been wanting to do some Sashiko and visible mending and darning for a while. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity. The holes were like relatively small in the jeans. So I did some patching and some darning, and then with the patch I did a Sashiko design. So I figured I would film it. I just wanted to put a disclaimer though that this is not really like my specialty. Like I don't know much about mending. I know like a little bit about hand sewing and like altering clothes a little bit, but if I do anything wrong in the video, I stand corrected. It worked for me how I did it, and I did reference an old needlecraft book. It's like I think it's like the Good Housekeeping book that I have that goes over how to darn a little bit because I hadn't done it before. But I just figured I'd take you along and kind of give you some creative inspiration if you have an old piece of clothing that you want to kind of upcycle or mend. I think it's an awesome idea. Especially because I try not to buy new. I mean, I definitely buy new clothes, but I try to thrift a lot, and I do also try to like mend things if they break, if they're like mendable. So I just think it's like a cool thing to do, and it adds a little bit of extra character to your clothes so they're not just like out of the box, like something you can buy at a department store. So I hope you guys enjoy this video and let me know what you think. All right, thank you. So for the first part, there was a very small hole kind of in like the butt area of the jeans. So I decided to darn that, and I used some of the variegated DMC floss. Basically, when you darn, you're making a bunch of running stitches across the hole, and then you end up going perpendicular to those stitches you first made and you weave them in together. So you're basically securing the hole with the surrounding fabric. So you want to start pretty far, not super far away, but you want to leave some room around the hole. So you want to make these running stitches probably like, I don't know, at least a 1/2 inch margin around the hole. That way you have something to kind of anchor your stitches. So as you can see here, I'm making some running stitches parallel to one another. I made sure to keep my thread long enough to where I can just kind of hopefully only use like 1 or 2 strands, because you can just kind of zigzag across. And I'm just using a regular embroidery needle. These jeans were thin enough to where it wasn't super hard to embroider on them. You can see I'm struggling a little bit here and there, but it's not too bad. The other thing is, I initially started doing this and I didn't have my hand in the jeans, and I ended up sewing the jeans together, which I was definitely trying not to do, but I would suggest having your non-dominant hand underneath the jeans to just kind of like keep the fabric separate. So once you get actually over top of the hole, you're gonna have a couple of long stitches that connect over to the other side, and that's totally fine because those are the stitches that you're basically going to be weaving together to kind of almost create another little like woven piece of fabric over top of the hole. So it's totally fine that those stitches are a little bit long and loose. You don't want them super loose, but just kind of like be mindful. Don't try to pull them tight or anything like that. None of this needs to be scrunched together because, like I said, it'll all kind of be filled in with the other stitches that we're going to be doing the opposite direction. So now I'm working stitches perpendicular to the rows of stitches that I first created, and I'm just making some running stitches across the other direction. I think it looks kind of cool the way it is. Like, it's a little bit messy looking, but I like the look of visible mending in that sense. So I'm not really trying to weave like between the stitches yet. I started on this like one side of the hole, so I'm not directly over the hole, but once I work my way over to the hole, I will start weaving in and out of those stitches that are basically just running across the hole. So here is where I'm over top of the hole. It's kind of hard to see, but I'm going to be going under, over, all of those stitches, and then just kind of continuing doing my running stitch on the fabric that doesn't have the hole to secure it. And you're basically just going to do that, and it's basically almost like a basket weave stitch in embroidery. So you'll do that, and then you'll zigzag back through, and you'll do the opposite way the next time. So if you went like under, over, then you'll do over, under, so that it kind of creates this little cross hatch of embroidery thread. So the next hole is kind of by the corner pocket, and it's a little bit bigger, and I think it needs some like stabilization. I can't just like do the darning on it, so I figured I would make a patch and then basically do some Sashiko to secure the patch down. So I'm using this Sashiko stencil and a water-soluble marker to mark out where I want the pattern to be, and I kind of just wanted it to start obviously around the hole and then kind of work its way down to the pocket. I'm not going to fill the entire pocket in, but I kind of like brainstormed how I wanted to do it, and I have like a little tile, so basically you can kind of connect the stencil wherever you want it to go. Next, I cut a piece of fabric to fit nicely around that hole, and then I did a blanket stitch around the fabric. I just didn't have my sewing machine out at the time, but you could easily use a serger or like a zigzag stitch to finish out the fabric. I just didn't want it to fray once it was inside the jeans. I secured the patch on with some pins, and then I got to stitching the Sashiko. So I'm using a doll needle. I think there's like specific Sashiko needles that you can buy as well, and they're basically just extra long embroidery needles. And I'm also using 6-strand embroidery floss. You could also use pearl cotton if you'd like, because sometimes when you're stitching with the 6-strand, it can kind of separate as you're going, which is annoying. But basically the advantage of having the long needle is that you can make multiple stitches at once instead of having to go like under and over the fabric constantly. It was a little bit hard to do on these jeans in certain areas, but it did help a lot to have the longer needle. So basically I'm just making running stitches on the stencil I made for myself. I really like Sashiko because it's so beautiful. There's so many different stencils and designs that you can do. This one is a super simple one though. It's pretty straightforward. I'm just doing the running stitches around the little arches, and that's about it. I also wanted to mention that I'm not using an embroidery hoop. You can if you'd like to, but I find it's easier to not use one with this kind of embroidery, just because if you're trying to gather the fabric and the fabric's tight in the hoop, it's going to be kind of hard to do that. So I opted out of using a hoop. So when I got to the pocket, I didn't want to sew it together, so I just made sure that I wasn't snagging the fabric in the back. and it was a little bit harder to use the longer needle in this space just because I was kind of having to go like back and forth from the front and the back of the fabric just because it was like a tighter space and the material was a little bit thicker. So at this point I knew that my design wasn't going to secure the patch all the way, so I ended up doing just some like running stitches around the patch to secure it. These stitches were mostly hidden in the pocket, so it didn't really mess up the design that much. There was a couple of stitches I had to do kind of outside of the design I had stenciled, but I don't think it looked too bad in the end just because the rest of the design kind of distracted from it. As you can see, the stitches are pretty much hidden behind that pocket. Once I was done with the Sashiko, I went ahead and secured the corner of the pocket to the patch so it wasn't torn anymore. This pocket corner was super hard to hand stitch just because the denim was so thick right there. So I was kind of grabbing the stitching that was still secure underneath the pocket, if that makes sense, to secure it to the fabric so I didn't have to go all the way through the pocket, and it also made it to where it was like hidden and it didn't look like I had sewed it back down. And here's the finished result. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I'm glad that these jeans will be functional again, but they're also kind of interesting and pretty. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe for more embroidery tips and tricks.